It's the Infinite Podcast. Go tell your friends. It's the Infinite Podcast. My God, it never ends. It's the Infinite Podcast with Rob and Cork the Kid.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of the Project Infinite Podcast, the podcast covering the infinite and ever-expanding multiverse of fandom. From movies, comics, TV shows, video games, we've got you covered, or in this case, in this episode, we've got you covered for one movie and one movie only.
Madam Web.
Nope, not yet. Not this time. I'm Rob, and that voice you heard, of course, is, as always, Court. And, Court, we saw Dune Part 2.
We did.
So, yeah, we're here. I'll
see you on Arrakis, my boy.
Yeah, we're gonna give you some very non-spoilery thoughts. Probably go for like 20-30 minutes ish, depending on how this goes. We saw it. So today is Tuesday the 27th. We saw this on Sunday, about 5 days before it releases, in theaters. And yeah, man, we're just gonna talk about it as lightly spoiled as we can. Probably talk about the technical stuff. Obviously, we'll talk about the performances, kind of with broad strokes, the performances of the characters and actors that we know or people know that are actually in this movie. We'll talk about as lightly as we can without diving too much, because obviously the movie's not out yet. This episode will also be out before the movie is out. So, if you want to listen to it, you absolutely can. If you kind of want to get like a feel out of, should I see this? Is this for me?
The answer is yes.
Yes.
The answer is yes.
In short, this we talked in our last full episode, last week about kind of the early reviews and stuff like that, and it was getting all this critical acclaim. And having now seen the movie, I can definitely say that critical acclaim is very warranted. This is as good a sequel as you're gonna get. The Two Towers is instantly what comes to mind for me, especially since I watched Dune Part 1 literally. I finished Dune Part 1 around 4:30ish p.m. Eastern Time. We saw Dune Part 2 at 7, so a couple hours in between, and these two movies weave together perfectly. If you had told me, this movie Dune was going to be just a 6-hour movie, it would still work. Which is an incredible compliment to give it. These two movies flow together seamlessly, but at the same time, Part 2 just expands on everything from Part 1. Everything is better, in my opinion. The performances, the visuals, everything is just better from the first movie. And not to say that the first one's bad. Obviously, the first one's amazing. But this movie just does what every great sequel does. It expands upon and improves upon everything from its predecessor, in my opinion.
This is special. It is the entirety of what is possible and the idea of what movie making is. I mean, from visual to sound to story to development to theme to questioning, all these things is just encompassing of what Denis was able to do with this. And I mean, I listened to the IMAX premiere of Tenet, the re-release, when Denis and Chris were talking about, both their films and kind of the approach. And, you can tell when you have a titan talking about film and the ideas of it, and you can tell Denis he is a once in a generational talent, if you want to look at it like that. It's just his command. It's not just his command of, visual storytelling. It's his command of the imagery and the possibility of what it could be. It's just the expansiveness of life that doesn't exist. It's not real, but somehow it feels ever so present, ever so important as well. This is probably one of the most important movies that's going to come out, narrative-wise and just the filmmaking process-wise. At this point, in my opinion, this is probably going to be the film to beat for 2024. You probably are going to think there's a sigh of relief from Christopher Nolan that this movie didn't come out last year, because it is truthfully just... spectacle is like an understatement. This is just this is one of those ones that just... it gnaws at you this is 2 days after we saw it. I can't stop thinking about this movie. Like, I can't stop thinking about how this was a possible thing that was made.
Yeah, it's insane. There's so many great mirrors to the first one. And just going back to what you said about the visual storytelling element being so important, obviously this is not even really a spoiler, but there are multiple instances in this movie where he goes back to the shot of the thumpers, and they're used, I don't know, I didn't hand count it obviously, but I don't know, it might have been 5 or 6 times throughout the movie where it goes to that close-up shot of the thumpers going off, but each time it means something different, if that makes sense, and implies something different every time, and I think that's really great because of how simple a technique it is, just to be able to use that, because in a lesser movie that would be distracting, where you're like, oh, we're doing this again, but in this movie every time it happens feels important, like you feel like something important is about to happen, like it almost feels like this, both in the universe and in the movie, as a movie, each time that happens it feels important, and I think that's a great kind of flag throughout the movie. Yeah. Just, I don't know why that particular repetition stood out to me so much, but it did, and it just goes to show you how well crafted the movie is, that he can make the same shot, same moment throughout a almost 3-hour movie feel important each time.
I love how present we are in this movie. I love how attached you are to this world. Like it's the same energy. It's different, but it's round about the same energy that Oppenheimer had. And I mean, we always talk about this. Great films have auras to them. This movie exudes aura. It depends what the film is. Like Top Gun has different aura than Oppenheimer did, than Barbie did, so on and so forth. But this one just feels grand. I mean, you made your point, and at this point it keeps happening about this being, the Two Towers or the Empire. You know what this is? This is the Dune Part 2 to Dune Part 1. I don't think there really is a comparison for this. This truthfully is unique. This is one of the most unique films. I know, obviously no spoilers, but Empire is a huge draw, but, I always say, and it's a relevant statement, that perspective is everything, and once we get into spoilers, you're going to understand that, the Empire, comparison is very interesting. I think it's probably one of the most interesting pieces. If you know the Dune story, you know why that is, but what's able to be presented here. And like I said, it's the theme, I said it before, Craig Mazin talks about it, how theme should always be a question. Theme's not a thing. The questions you have to ask in this movie are some of the best that you think about. They're thought-provoking this time because, like I said, perspective is absolutely everything. If you want to go down into performance, this, in my opinion, this might be in Timothee Chalamet's second best performance. Maybe only behind Beautiful Boy. That's probably the only one that might be better than this. Zendaya is, I think she might be the best acted character in this movie. Rebecca Ferguson is horrifying, to say the least, in this movie. She's just somebody you just can't take your eyes off, but it's just, you feel uncomfortable the whole time. And you want to talk uncomfortable, you talk about Austin Butler as Fade Roth. It's just, the idea of the movie star, and I know we talked about it a couple weeks ago, this is the movie that I think it's starting to feel like it's coming back. And it's just crazy because Timothy, Zendaya, Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, they're all under 30 years old. I think Austin's the oldest, and he's 30, I'm pretty sure. He's 29, something like that. Like, all of them are under 30, and I can tell they're probably not, besides Zendaya, who's contractually obligated to do this, like, they're probably not going to dip into television at this point. They're probably going to stay in movies. Like, you can I don't know what it is about the last couple of months. So we talked about 2023, and once we talk about the Oscars, we're going to talk about how generational 2023 was. The movies feel like they're in a good spot right now. Like, the actual movie theater going experience. I'll let you talk about it, but just the theater experience we had 5 days. This is an early fan event screening, and I just want you to talk about what we experienced at that.
First of all, it was packed.
There was almost no seats left, and we were in a massive theater.
Having done a couple of these now with you, this was easily the most populated one.
Yeah,
and we saw the Batman.
Yeah, yep,
early.
and that was packed. It was
packed, but it wasn't this packed.
Yeah, this was like there was no, and like you felt the buzz, like you felt something was about to happen. And I told you when we were walking out, I always have this theory about how people are going to perceive movies. Like usually, what's happening is this is just the human nature to do this. It's like, well, I'm gonna try to find the bad thing about something. I knew this movie was something when I was walking out, and people were like, that was pretty good. That was not bad. It wasn't bad at all.
It was that there wasn't a lot of the like visceral reactions to things that we've kind of grown accustomed to. People were locked in.
They were locked in.
Even like the moments that were humorous in the movie. It almost felt like people were afraid to laugh.
Yep. And I want to go even further with that point about those humorous moments too. They were relevant in this movie. Sometimes there's comedic timing and comedic, that humor for humor's sake. Like it was like a crescendo of what happened, because there's one specific character that gets a lot of comedy in this movie that you don't necessarily suspect is going to be this character.
Yeah.
But then once it starts to ramp up, you learn like, there's reason for this, and then it just has a heel turn to like, oh, this is this is serious. Like this is not just and it works. Like people were reacting to it. It was funny. But it was well done. But it wasn't just there to be there. It had substance to it, and it made sense.
Like I said, it was almost like people were like, should we laugh at this? But like it was just I feel like just whatever the scene was or the delivery was, it just kind of prompted people to laugh, and they were just like, should we be laughing? Like, because people were so locked into the movie. Like, I feel like nobody wanted to break the break the tension or break like the focus. But like, that's how a line is genuinely good in a movie, when it kind of draws this unbeknownst reaction from people when they're like, we didn't expect to laugh in this movie, but here we are, like we're doing it. Right. So it was incredible to kind of just be a part of. Like, it felt obviously, because the theater was more packed than when we saw Top Gun, but it was a similar air about it, where like people were just, we talk about all the time when we saw Top Gun in theaters, like that third act, and people were just
like lock in, like.
And this movie has a very similar.
It's similar, but it's a bit different, because it's almost so. I was thinking about how I can convey this thought, that like these thoughts that I was having about these prescient visions. Just kidding. I was thinking about this. This movie is gorgeous, but that's a given. Like, but it's deeper than that. It's so much deeper than that. It just being gorgeous. This movie is the epitome of the ideology of what visual storytelling is. It's not the idea of, I need to tell you what's going on, because that's not simple, but it's easy. I can show you what's going on, but for me to feel what's going on, that's a truthfully special thing that Denis has, and this team has, and Greg Fraser has, who, deserves all the credit. I mean, you look at Greg Fraser's body of work since he shot Lion in 2016. I mean, Lion, Rogue One. Lion, Rogue One. He shoots Dune 1, Dune 2, The Batman, part of the creator. Like, not bad. That's a resume in of itself. He's just, so obviously there's the Roger Deakins podcast. I listen to Greg Fraser and the cinematography podcast. Like, I love listening to Greg Fraser talk, because he's very technical, but he's technical with intent. He's very technical with story intent, and like how to make you feel about something very technically. He's so sound at what he does, but he's transformative. I mean, he's going to go down as probably one of the greatest photographers in film history, if he's not already. And obviously he's not a young man anymore, but he's got a long career. And like, these are the movies you put back to back against each other. And I'm going to talk about this for Denis, because we were talking about this leaving the theater. It is just, you have to feel proud of yourself at some point. Like, these are the movies you're having. What I want to talk about real quick is the blockbuster mentality. And this movie's tracking 170 million for an opening weekend, which is, that's a good sign for a lot of movies, because you crack 150 plus opening weekend.
Movie has a relatively low budget.
This movie cost $190 million. The Joker 2 cost $220 million. that shouldn't even make sense.
Yeah.
And once everybody sees this movie, you're going to understand that there's no way it should have been possible. But it's understanding that this needs to feel real to feel relevant.
And this is, this one in particular is not, it sounds dismissive to be like, this is the true measuring stick of this franchise, because the first one came out when we were still in that weird pandemic.
Not only the weird pandemic phase, but the actual weird pandemic phase for HBO Max at the time, yeah.
So I feel like this one is going to have what, obviously it's building off the backbone of the first one was really great, and people know the first one's really great. So I think that's going to obviously help this one, but this is going to be the one that tells us what this is. And if this is kind of like the perfect mixture of a blockbuster plus an actual movie, like the art. Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. I think this movie is going to be that balance, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it's just, obviously they shot this film in IMAX. We saw it in an IMAX theater. This is the way to see it. I just want to make that abundantly clear. This is the absolute way. And I love the quote that film is half, or movies are half visual, half auditory. Like, this movie needs to be,
seen and heard.
Like the sound mix in this movie is just phenomenal. I mean, and then to go along with the score, this score should always accompany and bolster, never overpower. This score is just synonymous at this point, but it feels so, enigmatic, for lack of a better term. Like, I don't know the better way to explain how this score makes you feel.
Yeah.
It's just, it weaves itself through the story itself. But it knows when to stay and it knows when to leave. It knows when to crescendo and knows when to decrescendo.
Boy doesn't know when to leave.
Yeah.
We can't talk about it, but yeah.
Boy, oh boy, yeah. This is an absolute special film. It's one of those ones where upon rewatches, I just have it's gonna probably get even better. Like,
for sure.
This movie is, in my opinion, a masterpiece. I don't know how you even get better, but on rewatches, it's just gonna become more relevant.
And we actually, we talked about before we recorded. We're like, are we gonna do the non-spoiler thing and then the spoiler thing in the same day and do both reviews? And then we both kind of agreed, like, kind of got to see this again before we do that.
Absolutely have to see this again,
because it would feel like, to me, like not a disservice, but it would feel along those lines to like only see this once on Sunday and then just be like, here's everything that we think about it. Like, I just feel like it needs more than that. I feel like I also need more than that, because I think this movie warrants it, for lack of a better term. Like, I think it warrants like not that I wasn't giving it my full attention, but like, it needs my full attention twice, more or less. For
There's
me to,
so
like,
much
actually,
movie in this movie.
And going back to what you said about the visual stuff, like the visual stuff is more than just, oh, that looks cool, or that looks nice. It's actually like the visuals are actually telling the story.
So I just want to get nerdy about camera stuff for a little bit. Obviously, they shot this in the IMAX. I just love the mixture of what they do. They shoot the IMAX. They use the film prints. One of my favorite examples from the first movie on that was the vision of the Jamis fight before it happens, and they're switching aspects, and it's like supposed to be a conduit for like he's seeing all these different timelines at the same time, these different ways of looking at things. Yeah. The way that IMAX renders faces and that depth of field, there's a specific shot in the movie, it's in the trailer, where he's walking throughout like the Fremen. He's walking through the Fremen. It's that massive wide shot where they're clearing the path for him. In that shot, there's another shot of just a close on one of the Fremen's face, and like that's when the third act's starting. That's like when it's like about to be like go time for this film. That shot just floored me. I couldn't explain why, but it's like I said, it's just the way that this modern technology of filmmaking, it just renders faces. How, it's not just the depth of field, it's just the depth of the world that you're in. You just feel encompassed in this place. And then, allegorically for story too, like you feel encompassed by the presence of Paul at this point. And that's a big piece of this movie is like the presence of Paul. Obviously, this is the ascension of Paul Atreides. That's where I'll leave it, but without going into spoilers. But this is one of those films that people are going to talk about. I think we always talk about it like the normal moviegoer. Like this is a film for everyone. Yeah. Like they deal with the weird stuff really well. Like, incredible, like, way more than I thought. And I shouldn't have ever doubted Denis in this way, but, you know, the second half of the book really gets off the rails weird. And that was always the argument with what Frank Herbert was doing, especially once you get later. It's like, this is getting, this is getting interesting.
Yeah. And, you know, to that point, I went back, obviously, and I listened to our first review of the first movie, and, you know, and just general critiques that people had of the first one was that, like, the lore is confusing, this, that, and the other thing. And
it's slow.
Yeah. And what I kept saying to you was the lore is not confusing. It's overwhelming, but a lot of it can be broken down in layman's terms. And I think the same is true for this movie, but what this movie does is, which I think all great sequels do, is it doesn't hold your hand. And it's like, look, the first one pretty much, we talked about this a little bit when we talked about Avatar, where it was like the first one is like, here's the lore, here's the building of the world, here's these characters, and then the second one is like, now we're gonna show you everything. Now we're gonna show you why all this stuff matters. And I think that's what this movie does really well, where it's, like I said, it marries so perfectly to the first one, where it pretty much picks up where the first one ended. And it's like, here you go, like, you're back in this world, and, you know, everything's gonna ramp up now. And now we did the building of the lore, we did the building of the world, and now the characters are gonna flourish. And I think that's where this movie, you know, succeeds the most, is it, for people who maybe were a little not into the characters or the performances in the first one, besides maybe Rebecca Ferguson's character, everyone levels up in this movie across the board.
And most importantly, it is Timothee Chalamet.
Yes.
It's the biggest.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know how I look at this? It's how I looked at Letitia Wright in Black Panther 2. It's like,
yeah,
you have to take the step, and, you know,
he did.
I'm going to ask you at the end your one word to describe this movie, but I'll say my word now. It's grace. This movie is just absolutely a graceful film. And it's not graceful in the narrative, because the narrative is quite the opposite of graceful, but it's the handling of a film like this. Again, this shouldn't be real. Like, I told you when we were walking out of the theater, like, I was kind of speechless walking out of the theater. It wasn't speechless of, like, you know, hyperbolic speech, like, being speechless. It was, like I said, it was the idea of, like, this shouldn't exist. Like, the fact that this, on top, only cost $190 million. On top of, you have all these stars in this movie. And, you know, I was reading, like I said last week, I was reading through Dune Exposures, and, you know, Josh Brolin talked about, like, at that point, you have to leave the egos at the door. And I guess the last point before you get into your word is that all comes together, and this is the beauty of what directing is. This is the whole point.
Yeah.
That's why Denis Villeneuve is, you know, one of the greatest storytellers on the planet, because he wrangled all these people. Not only did he wrangle all these movie stars, he had to deal with these old movie stars that already were established. He had to deal with these younger movie stars that were, you know, arguably some of the most famous on the planet. He had to deal with this story that he's been told his whole life was impossible to do. This is the most impossible sci-fi thing you ever do. So in a lot of ways, he was told, this isn't going to work. There's no way this works. And then he turned around and said, I'm just going to give you one of the greatest movies possible at this point. So that's my biggest, like, win, is Denis Villeneuve himself. I think when it all gets said and done, obviously he's going to make, like I said last week, he's going to make Rendezvous with Rama, that Arthur C. Clarke book. He's going to, I think he said 2 days ago, he's almost done with the Dune Messiah script. Like, in like 10 years, we're going to start to have some conversation. There's some much needed conversation about Denis Villeneuve. And, you know, I said it. Prisoners to Sicario to Arrival to Blade Runner to Dune 1 to Dune 2. I think he's probably going to do Dune Messiah, then Rendezvous with like, that is a generational run of movies. I didn't even talk Enemy. I didn't talk Incendies. I didn't talk Polytechnic. Like, he's been doing this since the early 2000s. He's been doing this, and look at the quality every single time he steps out there.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, assuming that the third one holds and exceeds the quality of this one, to me, it would be this and Lord of the Rings in terms of film trilogy.
Yeah. I just...
And I never thought...
Yep.
I never thought that, you know, I didn't think... to this point, no trilogy for me has touched those Lord of the Rings films. I think that's the perfect trilogy that's the perfect film trilogy in my opinion. It just is. Every movie is better than the next, and all three are exceptionally high quality. And again, I mean, the Tolkien stuff again is probably something that you never thought would be able to be put on film to that degree, and Peter Jackson pulled it off. So, and I think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a true, a tried and true. It feels weird because those movies feel so recent to me, but this really is like this generation's Lord of the Rings trilogy. Like, to me, it doesn't belong in that conversation with the Dark Knight trilogy. It just doesn't. I think we're past that. I think we're already past it. Like, I truly do. In terms of a film trilogy.
Because I think that Dune 1 is stronger than Batman Begins, and then there's going to be people that don't like what I'm about to say.
No, I think I agree with you.
But Dune Part 2 is on paper a better film than
just say it.
The Dark Knight.
I think I agree. I agree. So I think that's what we're talking about. Like, I think we're talking about a truly generational film and probably a generational trilogy when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I cannot overstate how and this movie, when this movie ends, you're like, I need Messiah right now. There's a line that Paul says at the end of this movie. And you're like, oh yeah, like, I need this film
and
yesterday.
not in a like a ham-fisted, like, this is a sequel bait line. It's more like a
I'm here.
Yeah, and and which is exactly what a great sequel does, is it leaves your characters, in some degree at a crossroads. And that's where this movie leaves Paul in a way that the first one sort of did, in the sense that, like, the first one was more like he's starting his journey, and now this one was like he's on the journey, but now he's at a crossroads, and the third one is where we're gonna take it. And I think that's obviously a perfect setup. Yeah,
man, these performances are,
I know,
magnetic. And I mean, we say it all whenever we give out our awards, and we'll give out our awards during the spoiler one. We always say, like, sometimes it's simple. This one is probably the most complicated, simple one that we're going to get, because that second half that Timothy...
There's two characters that walk a very similar arc, but do it in a totally different way. There's you know which two characters I'm talking about, but they walk a very similar arc with a very similar inciting incident that crescendos that arc, but the way they both go is so subtly different, and that's what makes their performances really exceptional, is that you could easily clock that these two characters are kind of walking a similar narrative track, but the performances are so subtle that you're like, yeah, they're kind of doing the same thing, and that could be distracting, but there's a specific point where they both kind of go like this, and they split from the similar arc to one goes one way, one goes the other way, and you're like, oh.
And this movie, again, on levels that shouldn't work, the religious connotations are, I'm talking one wrong line could have just ignited the internet on fire, ignited this film, and just destroyed this film. But again, that's why I used grace as my word to describe this movie. It's just the way everything is handled. It's just understood. Like, it's just like everybody got to set, and everybody looked at Denis, and he was just like, it's unexpected, and they were like, understood. Like, we know exactly what's expected out of every single last person on that set of that movie.
Totally agree.
One of the best third acts too. That third act is
exceptional.
That second act also it's probably one of the strongest, if not, that's got to be one of the best second acts in terms of holding that movie together too. Because a lot of times second acts can get lost,
especially in a long movie.
Arguably, it's funny. Like, not worst, but like, the weakest act is the first act, which usually isn't the case, and the first act is phenomenal too. So the second act of that movie that's when there's a revelation and a heel turn right in the second act, and it's obviously monumental. And there's two, I'm talking massive spoilers that happen during that we can't talk about until Friday, but once that flips, the performances flip with it.
Yes.
And you're like, oh my, like, you can feel it. And again, same thing that happened with Top Gun and that third, like I said, it was that close on that Fremen's face, and then it was just, I was like, oh, it's happening. Like, it's about to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think it's easy to kind of get yourself lost in stuff like that, like when characters flip. It can be distracting because it really relies on the performance to sell it. Because that's a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to do, to be like, I've been this character for so long, and then kind of like on the drop of a dime, like, now I'm different. That's way more difficult to pull off than like a gradual ascent or descent. And in this case, it's like more of like a coin flip, and then, you know, that character's different, and not in a bad way.
Yeah.
It's narratively designed that way to happen in that sense, and it's just flawlessly done by the performers involved.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's, you know, you can write it away, but you have to personify it. That's the
you have to sell it.
You have to sell it. That's exactly what, in my opinion, you have to give me the sell of this thing. And man, the scene that comes after it, we talked about that scene for a good bit when we were standing outside the theater. We were like, oh, like,
it's crazy.
Yeah, that might be, I don't want to, because Beautiful Boy is an incredible performance, but what he does in that second act in that scene, you know exactly what scene I'm talking about. I was like, wow. Like,
yeah.
I was like jaw dropped. Like, that's when the acting is like, that's like, you know the hashtag acting award.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just gonna spoil it. That's gonna be mine. Like, and Zendaya is so incredible in this movie. Rebecca Ferguson is haunting, and just, and it's, I can't wait to talk about Rebecca Ferguson's arc, because you want to talk about, you became the very thing you swore to destroy. It's so good. It's so good. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I mean, just, you know, you said earlier, like, your word. I think my word is inexplicable. But just in the best way. Like, you know, it's along those lines of, like, this movie shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be as good as it is.
Yeah.
It shouldn't draw everything out of you that it draws out of you.
Yeah.
But it just does.
You know why it's so good? This is, like I said, it's the whole idea of what the movie is. Like, what movie, whatever the word you want to use, like, it's everything put together, weaved perfectly. It's literally everything. Visual, audio, acting, like, everything works. There's not one piece that does not work or that slack. No, everything is on 10. Every single piece of it.
Yeah, and I mean that, you know, in simple terms, like, just to kind of get back to that kind of idea of simple terms, this movie is a master at work. A master at the peak of his powers is what we're witnessing.
Yeah, this
right
is
now.
like I said, you know, I can't even say the same argument that I used for Christopher Nolan when I said, you know, you could throw the hat in the air, like, what's the best film he's done? Is it Interstellar? Is it Dark Knight? But I still think Oppenheimer is the best time he's ever directed. I was going to use that same thing when I walked out of the theater, and I was going to say Arrival is probably his best movie, but this is no. This is his best movie. This is the best movie he's ever directed, and hopefully, you know, you keep the same energy with Messiah, but this was everything you could have asked for.
He's just, I know it feels kind of dismissive to say this, but the way this movie's directed and put together, I know how much hard work goes into it, and I know how many, like, tireless days I'm sure everyone spent on this, but it felt so effortless.
I know exactly what you mean. It's when you, again,
it's seamlessly put together.
It's what Nolan had for Oppenheimer, in my opinion, where it's just like, this I worked my whole career to get here. Like, this is like the championship
it's
win.
confident.
Yeah.
This movie is confident.
You know, and you know, Zendaya said it in one of the interviews, like, when you walk, like, our energy is stemming from looking at Denis' face every day when he's on set. He's like, I have this. Like, I know what this is.
This is a confident movie.
You know when I think about that, I think about how the Daniels did Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's once you know exactly what the thing is. I know what this is. Like, you look at, you know, you look at the Godfather trilogy, same thing. You look at Empire, like, I know, story-wise, visual, like, I know everything. I know every beat about about this. There's no confusion. There's no studio interference. I know what the heck this thing is.
It's like, it's like in a sport. It's like basketball or like golf. Like a player lets off like a shot and you just, as soon as you let it go. And that's what this movie feels like. It feels like such a confident movie. Like it knows what it is. Everyone involved knows what it is. Everyone involved in it knows what they're a part of. And you feel it. Like there's no other way to you feel it. You feel it.
The best way. This one, obviously, or the movie starts with the famous throat singing from the first movie, but like you feel the roller coaster. Yeah. Harness come down as soon as you hear it, and then as soon as the WB logo, and I'm like, oh shoot, like it's happening again. Like I got that same feeling that I got from it's happening. And
it's brilliant to basically start the two movies the same way.
It's so smart, and Messiah's gonna be probably the same exact thing. Yeah. I wonder who's gonna be the monologue for Messiah though, and I would love if it was Paul himself for this one. I think that would be a really good mirror. This movie, or this trilogy, I think is going to play a bit like... I think this is going to play very interestingly because the third movie, obviously Messiah is going to be more... I think Messiah is going to be a little bit more talky than this movie because this movie is, we didn't even talk about the technical marvel of just the fight choreography in this movie is... Sound is like an understatement. Like, again, this is the blockbuster meets art. Like, these fights are just... visceral, like they're actually feel relevant and tough. So but I think, like I said, Messiah's going to be a little bit more politicky. It's going to be a little bit more talky. Obviously, for those who know what happens in this franchise, that there will be action in this third movie. Messiah, there's some stuff that's going to happen in Messiah, but I think it's going to be more of this Messiah is probably going to be the most character study one out of the three of them.
Yeah.
So it's something sense. I can't wait for. And I don't know why I get this weird feeling that, they're going to wait. Maybe not, because I think that Warner Brothers is going to be like, as soon as the B hits, instead of the M, the B hits for the billion, because 170 opening weekend, the energy we got from that fan event, and that was 5 days before this movie, 6 days before this movie comes out. I just got to think that this movie is going to make at least 800, 850 at the very least. Yeah,
and it's one of those things where at the same time, like if you're Warner Brothers, you kind of got to give him the Jim Cameron leash. Like if he wants to take 5 years to do this third one, let him.
Yeah, and you know what's cool, and I implore everybody to read Rendezvous with Rama. Like I don't know why I get the sense that like I don't know why it would feel cool if he just made that movie in between, so he took more time, and then, he makes another sci-fi movie. It's probably going to be incredible, like usual. It's something where he can probably, take a breath. I don't even like to say that, because Rendezvous with Rama is it's like a story that feels so small at first, and then it just balloons, but... If he decides to go that route and maybe makes another type of movie in between, so be it. Did Nolan do that for The Dark Knight? He made Inception in between The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. So he made not a small movie, he made a massive movie in between the two. So maybe Denis, and I know Denis and Chris are friends, so maybe he takes a page out of that book before you hit your last movie. Hey, take a break, man. Like, step away from that world for a little bit and gather yourself. There's also the other side to the coin where this energy's too high. Warner Brothers is probably going to be like, no, don't even think about it. Like, Messiah is greenlit. as soon, I bet you as soon as Monday hits, next Monday, Messiah will be greenlit. Like, as soon as they get out of the weekend and that movie has 100 or 200 million in they're going to, you're getting the third movie. So don't even worry about it. Sisterhood's probably going to get greenlit off of this too. Off the power of Rebecca Ferguson herself just greenlit a whole show, maybe. Yeah. Hopefully they let her in the show. I just have a feeling that show's going to be in the past. It's probably not going to be in the present.
No, I would expect it to be in the past, yeah.
What a picture.
It's really... Yeah,
what a picture.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like... It's funny that you use the roller coaster metaphor, a couple minutes ago, because that's what it felt like. You ever been to an amusement park and you get off like a really sick ride and you just get right back online? Mm-hmm. You're like, I gotta get back on. I gotta do that again. That's how I feel about this movie. I felt
sad leaving the theater. I was like, I have to I have to see that again.
That's how
immediately.
I felt too.
Like I have to experience
I
that
wanted
again.
to go right back around,
in. I was
right
just
back
like,
and get back in line.
And it felt even worse because I was like, oh, I have to wait a week to do it. Like, it wasn't even one of those things where like, all right, well, we can go again tomorrow. Like, no. And that's maybe even more genius. Like, the wait, like...
Sure.
Because people are, and I was just talking to somebody about that. Usually when this happens, as soon as it hits, like, because we got to see it so normal people could see this. It wasn't just critics that saw it. Usually it starts to tail. Like, this movie is at altitude. Like, it's at its cruising altitude, and it's not, there's no turbulence, there's nothing. Like,
yeah.
It feels like everybody that's seeing this movie, like, I feel like the worst review I've seen was like an 8. Like, this movie is like, that's absurd. That's the worst one I've seen. Like, it's like all these different critics that have been critical of all these different types of movies that we've liked or anything like that it feels like all of them are like, oh yeah, like, this is the one. Like, this is...
Well, I mean, sometimes you just get a thing that's just undeniable.
Yeah.
And that's what this movie is. That also could have been my word for this movie, is undeniable. Because that's what it is. Like, you can obviously... Anyone can look at anything and nitpick it and criticize it, but at the end of the day, that's all you're doing. Whereas, like, the overall presentation of the thing is undeniable. And that's how I feel about this movie.
Man, this story's so tight. Like, that was an argument for the first one, that the story was slow. I never picture, and I just rewatched the first one. I never take that story as slow. I think that story, where I think it gets confused? I think people confuse the slowness for the uncomfortable nature of what happens in the second act. The siege of Arrakis and when the Atreides are murdered, like, that doesn't feel good, and that makes this movie way even better because,
well, that's what I mean. The first one and the second one married together perfectly,
but they both stand alone like, they stand alone very well. Like, you don't need to watch the first one to watch the second one, but like, also you should watch the first one because
I would recommend it.
Yeah, because they hold very well, and I mean, obviously he walks into the desert in the end of the first one, and the second one starts in like, oh man, even the score bit, it's just so powerful but so subtle in the beginning of this movie, and you're like, oh, I'm in. Like, that's energy. That's power.
Yeah. Oh man.
I could talk about this movie for days.
But I'm more excited to talk about it more in depth later this week.
Yeah. There's some reveals.
We talked for 40 minutes and we didn't say anything substantive about the plot.
No.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Which is great. Because sometimes we do these when we're just like, oh, we got to talk about this thing. We're like, we can just talk about the overall presentation of the thing for an hour if we wanted to and not even dip into a single thing that happens. Because that's just how good it is.
This is filmmaking. This is blockbuster. But, like, not... this is blockbuster.
It's a perfect marriage.
Yep.
It's a perfect marriage. Like I said, confident, undeniable, inexplicable, all of those things.
I'm feeling really good about the state of the movies right now. And it's just... This has got to make a lot of people feel good that, like, this is the type of movies that we're getting. Like, you got Oppenheimer last year that is a blockbuster, but it's also... And Denis even said it himself. This is an R-rated talkie movie. And it made $1 billion. Like, people want these types of movies. You just have to tell it and show it well. That's all it needs. It just needs people that care about it.
Yeah. All right, man. So that's going to do it for us until later this week when we talk about the movie in full. Probably be maybe like a 5 to 10 minute kind of quick overview, and then we'll just dive right into the spoilers because we just went on for about 45 minutes about kind of our general thoughts. So you'll kind of know where we sit. So yeah, just this will be up tomorrow. It's Tuesday, so this will be up Wednesday, and then you can consume that if you like before you go see the movie, because I'll try and make it as clear as possible that you can absolutely listen to this without having seen the movie. This is more or less us selling you on the movie. We don't have to, but we want to. So that's what this is. So you can follow us on Twitter at ProjectINF_pod. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Instagram.
That's Project Infinite Pod.
And yeah, man, later this week, in a couple of days, we'll sit down again and talk about this movie in full. Just talk about everything. I can't wait. I can't wait to see it again. Can't wait to talk about it again. because this is just one of those. It's one of those. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man, that theater walkout was something. Walking out of that theater was, everybody was like, oh, wow.
Yeah. Hey, oof.
A wolf went over the crowd when we were walking out. They were like, oh.
Yeah, it was like, it's such a like a quiet euphoria just washed over the entire crowd.
I see what you did there. Shout out Zendaya.
There you go. We'll talk about her and everybody else in this.
And him, who's Timothee Chalamet, because he was him in this movie.
And we'll talk about everybody and everything in this movie in Dune Part 2. We'll have some numbers for you. We'll have some numbers for you by Thursday, so that'll be fun. Or by Thursday, Friday, we'll have some numbers for you, so that'll be fun. Yeah, man. We will see you later this week for our full review of Dune Part 2. Until then, goodbye.
Peace.